Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a closer look at one of the most talked about and also one of the more divisive adventure bikes of the year, the BMW R1300GS. BMW didn't just refresh the GS, they basically rebuilt it from the ground up. And while it may look slimmer and more streamlined than the outgoing 1250GS, this is an all-new machine, but it's still very much a heavyweight in every sense of the word. Let's start with some important numbers. Seat height 850 millimeters. Wet weight 237 kilograms. Power 145 horsepower at 7,750 RPM. Torque 149 Newton meters at 6,500 RPM. Wheelbase 1518 millimeters. Suspension travel 190 millimeters front, 200 at the rear. Fuel tank capacity 19 liters. Now, one of the features I was most eager to try out on the new GS was the adaptive vehicle height control feature. What this does is lower the entire bike by 30 millimeters as you come to a stop, and then return it to its full height as you get back up to speed. It works hand in hand with the bike's semi-active electronic suspension, and unfortunately this demo bike didn't come with the adaptive height control feature, which means this is not a standard feature on the GS. If you want it, you'll need to spend an extra $5,000 for that privilege, because it's also bundled with adaptive cruise control. The thing is, on a bike as tall as this, I'd say adaptive height control isn't just a nice to have, it's almost essential. This technology gives you the height where you need it and then lowers it where it counts. But again, it comes at a price. The bike I'm testing also has forged wheels, which are an extra $1,500. If you want an electronically adjustable windscreen or even a center stand, that's even more money. Once you spec it out reasonably, it's not inconceivable to find yourself looking at an $80,000 motorcycle. I guess that's the price you pay for progress. Because there's no denying it, the 1300 GS is absolutely brimming with technology. It's possibly the most technologically advanced motorcycle on the market today. But there's another catch, apart from the price. Assessing all those features takes practice. The menu system isn't especially intuitive. It's something you'll definitely have to spend time with and learn. On board, the 850mm seat height feels accurate. I can just about get the balls of my feet down. At low speeds, the GS is actually very maneuverable, but it still doesn't feel nearly as planted or as naturally balanced as a road-biased BMW Boxer. I think it's because the engine sits slightly higher and further back. This gives the bike better ground clearance when cornering, but it also raises the center of gravity. The new bike just feels a little more top-heavy when you're doing turns, especially tight turns at walking pace. But once you're moving, the bike almost feels like a middleweight. The bars are wide and you're perched high enough to see over most cars. The bike's handling is precise and the suspension is exceptional. The way it irons out uneven road surfaces is genuinely class-leading. This bike slices through corners, and true to tradition, the GS really flatters you and makes you ride faster than you should. Lane splitting is doable as long as the lanes are not too narrow. Let's talk about the engine. While it's powerful and responsive, I find it's also lost some of that character that made the old boxes so distinctive. That deep, pulsing thump has faded and has been replaced at times by a sound and feel that is more akin to a generic twin. Efficient, yes. Engaging, not so much. Speaking of engine sound, some owners have described the engine note as mechanical clatter, and to me it sounds more like a fast, rhythmic tapping, and most noticeable when the bike is idling. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it mechanically, it's just the nature and personality of this new engine. It just feels very different. So a big part of what's always made earlier generation boxer twins so easy to live with is that pleasant, calming vibe at low speeds. The rhythmic pulse you feel through the bars, the gentle hum under you. This engine is smoother, more refined, but it's also lost a bit of that soothing quality. And personally, I feel that subtracts from the experience. Especially when you're just putting around town or cruising slowly through traffic. It's just not as satisfying and enjoyable as it used to be. That said, it's a muscular, smooth engine that pulls mostly cleanly from low revs. It's a brilliant performer, but a completely different animal from the boxes of old. Now, if you're coming from another brand, you might wonder what all the fuss is about. Because the new 1300 might be exactly how you'd expect a high-performance adventure twin to behave. Refined, responsive, smooth, and efficient. But for long-time GS riders, that shift in character is something you'll notice and possibly miss. As mentioned, the bike's low-speed feeling is mostly good, but I found a bit of vagueness moving off from stop. That moment between twisting the throttle and actual movement feels a little disconnected, and I often found myself giving either too much or too little throttle. This made low-speed maneuvering trickier than expected. And then there's the gearbox. It's notchy in the lower gears. It feels solid and deliberate, but it's definitely not smooth. Sometimes it even gets clunky, and that's the one mechanical aspect that annoyed me the most of this bike. So how does it feel in traffic? Does it run hot? The engine does have a compression ratio of 13.3 to 1, and that's higher than the 1250GS and significantly more than the old air-cooled boxes. More compression means more power, means more heat, so no surprises there. But the engine heat in traffic did not strike me as excessive. It actually feels no warmer or cooler than the last bike I rode, which was the CBR 650R. But oddly enough, I do notice the heat on the highway. At around 80 km/h, warm air does get channeled to your lower thighs and knees. I'm guessing that in temperate climates, this might be a nice thing to have, but less so in Singapore though, especially in the tunnel. I never expected the R1300GS to shine at this urban jungle test, and no surprises, it didn't. As a pure city bike, the GS is hard work, for me. That's the caveat. Your experience with the bike can be very different. So with that out of the way, these are my personal and subjective comments and impressions. Of course, at first glance, the 1300 looks slimmer, shorter, smaller even than the outgoing GS. But the moment you get on it and lift it off its stand, you realize that this is still a very big, heavy motorcycle. So with a wet weight of 237 kilograms and a seat height of 850 millimeters, the GS was always going to feel like a big, heavy bike. And in a sense, my gripe with this GS and early
and earlier GSs hasn't changed. It feels like a bike meant for someone stronger, taller, bigger, someone who looks more like a Viking than I do. Because for me, at around about 230 kilograms, a bike starts feeling big. And if you add height into the equation, a motorcycle feels less like a motorcycle and more like a mobile tool cabinet with handlebars. Moving and maneuvering it is more about heaving and shoving and pushing, and less about control and finesse.
Once you're out on the open road, fully loaded, carrying a passenger, the GS finds its stride. It is in its element. This is what it was built for: long distances, big adventures, mountain climbing. Around town, the 1300GS is less charming.
So we've all heard the cliche, a bike feels heavy at standstill, but once on the move all that weight disappears and it becomes a light bike. This whole agile when in motion assumption is not very useful when you're riding in the city, when you're riding in traffic, because you spend a lot of time not moving.
Or moving along very slowly. It's nice to know a bike is agile once it's moving, but it's better and far more reassuring to know that you can get yourself out of a tight spot without resorting to high-risk maneuvers or calling for backup.
And honestly, this is where I struggled most with the GS. It just feels like too much bike for me, and I never really felt completely relaxed when I was on this bike.
Yesterday I reverse walked the bike into a parking lot. The surface was smooth, it was daylight, I had my boots on, no problem.
A few hours later, I tried the same thing, but the ground was wet, a little bit uneven, and I wasn't in boots. What had felt easy a few hours later now suddenly became a potential bike dropping moment.
The GS didn't change, but everything else did. And it was enough to make the whole thing feel like a struggle. That's the thing about bigger bikes, you really need to be switched on all the time. Even something as routine as navigating a parking lot can feel like a slow motion disaster waiting to happen, and the GS is no exception. So is the new R1300GS better than the old one for city riding? In many ways, yes. It's smoother, more powerful, and packed with technology that makes navigating traffic easier and safer. The engine is refined and smooth, almost too refined. It doesn't quite feel like a traditional boxer anymore. It now feels more like an engine you'd find in a naked sport bike. Efficient, high-performing, but a little bit anonymous. And in making the engine better, I wonder if BMW might have sanded off some of what made it interesting. At lower revs, it doesn't give off that familiar boxer rumble. Instead, there's a lot of mechanical chatter. On the upside, the engine is smoother, has less vibration, and pulls cleanly, mostly from low revs. It's muscular, capable, and very refined. If you want a bike that can handle tight corners, traffic lights, and busy city streets while still offering top-tier adventure capabilities, then the R1300GS will basically do it all. Just be ready for its size and sophistication to take some getting used to, especially in the urban jungle. And be prepared to stomach the premium price tag that comes with all that tech and refinement. It's less about taking the long way home. Now it simply says, proceed to destination. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.